Craig, in seeking to understand how physics can explain reality, the deepest, most fundamental level, we always come across the concept of time. And increasingly, physics seems to tell me that time is not real. That sounds crazy in an intuition sense. So, is time real?
Depends what you mean by time, I guess, of course. Philosophers make this distinction between tensed and tenseless time. It's a little bit of a tricky distinction. Tenseless time is thinking about the world on a big four-dimensional block, where you have a bunch of events ordered by earlier than or later than other events.
Kind of a sequence.
A sequence. And they're always, in some sense, always on that block. And so, Socrates drinking hemlock is earlier than this event. And maybe the building of the world's first mile-high building is maybe later than this event. So that's the tenseless view. But people also often think also in a tensed view, where they introduce these ideas of past, present, and future, and think of them as global notions which apply everywhere and that change. And so they might say this event is real, the Socrates drinking hemlock is past, and the mile-high building, the inception of it is in the future. And think of that as some sort of absolute distinction. Maybe they even think that something else, correlates with that the past is settled, the future open, or something like that.
It doesn't seem wildly improbable.
No, but you can't find that in the physics.
Yeah,
and that's really one of the
that's the challenge.
Puzzles.
That the physics is so different than our normal perceptions, because the past and the future seem very different and not real. The past is our memories are real, but the existence of the past, in some contemporary sense, is not real. But in the tenseless version, in this four-dimensional block universe space, they're all there. It's just the order of them is different. Is that right?
That's right. So some people have really, resist the physical picture and, put their foot down and say, well, if I can't find this tensed image of time in the physics, then there is no time at all. So the philosopher McTaggart thought that he had this little logical puzzle with the idea of past, present, and future, because they kept updating and it wasn't clear to him how you could make sense of that. And then the great, probably the greatest logician of all time, Kurt Gödel, also made this argument where he thought he couldn't find this tense structure, this updating past, present, future in the physics. And
our common perception.
That's right.
He couldn't find that in the physics. Yeah.
Nope. And so he said, so much the worse for physics, it doesn't even have a time. Nothing in it is even worth dubbing time.
So those are very different views, looking at the same facts and coming up with different perceptions.
Yeah, and then somebody like me will say the opposite, where I would say, so much the worse for the tensed conception of time. It's really a feature more of us projecting it onto the world than in the world itself.
So let's see if this analogy works. When you fly aircraft, pilots are told, always trust your instruments, not your perceptions, because if you're in a fog or you're misoriented, you sometimes think up is down and down is up, but always trust your instruments, because those don't lie. You don't have the cognitive issues that you may have in distortion. So is that a potential analogy with how we look at time?
Yeah, that's a great analogy, because then that's really the way I think about it. Because I think, if we look to our instruments, the
physics equations,
the physics,
yeah,
and really, I think relativity theory, destroys the tensed picture. So, for instance, relativity will tell you that what events are, simultaneous, what events are now, depend on whether your state of motion.
Right.
And so, if you and I were walking past one another, then that moment where we walk past each other, if we were to think of what events are now for you and what events are now for me, they would carve out different events in the universe. And now, if you thought one there was a distinguished future-past division, well, which one, mine or yours? Unless one of us is, sort of metaphysically special, it wouldn't.
I claim a lot of things, but not that.
Me neither.
Right. That privileges relativity, and for a long time that had a lot of legitimacy. But now with quantum mechanics sort of contesting with relativity for who is dominant, if either one is, in terms of the combination of the two, quantum mechanics would have time being more fundamental than relativity would. So it is, I think the question is still open.
I think you're right. So certainly the quantum mechanics has a time which is very much more like classical physics time, and we can't quite reconcile. I mean, that's what I think is so interesting about the project of quantum gravity, trying to reconcile our best theory of the small, quantum mechanics, with our best theory of the big, general relativity, is that, where do they buckle when you push them against each other? Right, right on time, is you've got this time and relativity, which depends on your state of motion, depends on the distribution of matter in the universe. It's dynamical. In quantum mechanics, it's not dynamical. It's just this absolute parameter in the theory.
So I guess the answer to the question, is time real? It depends on how you define time and how you define real.
Yeah.
I don't know what I've learned now, but what have I learned?
Yeah, we've learned at least how to approach the question. Mm-hmm. And if we want to read our answer to that question off our best physical theory, then, I guess we haven't learned. We need to know which one is our best physical theory and which one is closest. And some physical theories, some perspective theories, hew more to relativity, and then
where time would be less
cause
important.
More trouble for time.
Right.
Exactly. And then some hew more to quantum mechanics, and then time comes back triumphant.